Hi, friends. We are hard at work on season 2.
But we are revisiting some of our top episodes from season 1 so that you always have an episode of The Burnout Room in your podcast feeds.
Yes. So this week, we hope that you will revisit our episode on organizational change because you know what my favorite topic is? Organizational change.
No, not really. Sarah actually hates change. But in the episode, we talk about like why we don't like change and why nonprofits especially might be resistant to change and how you can overcome that resistance to change. So we hope that you revisit this episode and find something really helpful and beneficial from it. Be sure to stick to the end and listen to our Ripples of Gratitude, which is our favorite part of every episode where we're thankful to people in our community. And then there's also something else at the very end, Sarah, that we have at this episode.
Yes, just a little fun tidbit from us at the end of the podcast. So make sure you hang out until the very end to check that out.
Especially if you're looking for a laugh.
Yes, because that's where we do that at the end of the episode.
Where we do that. Yeah. So we hope you enjoy the revisiting org change episode, and we will see you next time.
Welcome to the Burnout Room, a podcast about burnout, effective leadership, and well-being in nonprofits.
I'm Dr. Courtney Keim, a workplace wellness researcher and professor.
And I'm Sarah Burris, an organizational leader and nonprofit wellness advocate.
Whether you're facing burnout, leading a team, or working to build a healthier workplace, this is your space to find support, community, and solutions for any organization.
So on today's episode, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, organizational change. Courtney, why don't you give us a little bit of research to get us grounded in our conversation?
Yeah. So, Sarah, I love how you introduced this topic by saying it's everyone's favorite, because it's interesting to me that we as humans become so resistant to change. And yet, I mean, would you want to eat the same thing for dinner every single night?
I mean, I could eat the same thing for dinner every single night, but like, I like a little variety. Sure.
Right. Like, I'm not saying could you, but I'm just saying, like, would you, if given the choice, would you literally eat the same dinner every single night? You may have your favorite go-tos, you may have your kind of routine, but you eventually are going to want to change that up a little bit. So do you want to work every day, or would you like to change it up and every now and then, I don't know, take a vacation to go hiking or go to the beach?
Yeah, I guess we can change. I guess change is okay.
Right. Exactly. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is like, we resist change. And I want to talk a little bit about like why we resist change. But change is also just a necessary part of life. And it certainly is a necessary part of organizations and how organizations function. But I do want to say that change is, most of the time, can be stressful. I'm going to go back to the example that I like to give, which is, speaking of hiking, pretend like you are going for a hike and you are going to camp out at this hiking site, and you have had a nice, wonderful dinner by the campfire. Maybe you've cooked some s'mores and you are getting ready to settle inside your tent, and you climb into your tent. And then after you settle down, you hear a rustling outside of the tent, and you zip that tent open. You see a bear. Remember, we talked about this before. There's the bear. What are you going to do? What is your response if you are hiking in the woods and you see a bear?
Oh, my response is to get... Okay, so I feel like some context is needed here to everybody who's listening. I camp and hike a lot. So if I saw a bear, I would walkie-talkie my husband and be like, I need you to come deal with this bear.
Yes, perfect. Yes. So you are immediately, given the situation, problem solving, right?
Yes, somebody else come deal with this problem.
Right, exactly. So this is what happens to our body, as we've talked about this before on the podcast. Like, when you are getting into a stressful situation, your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, and you are going to go fight, flight, freeze, faint, right? Or walkie-talkie, which I guess I can add that to the list, walkie-talkie somebody to come and solve this problem. That is what we do when faced with a challenging situation, is we might engage with the problem. We might try to problem solve. You feel stress. You feel that stress response when the situation is uncontrollable. You don't have any control over this bear being here. And also, if you don't have anything to do to cope with this bear being in front of you. So in your example, you are like, yes, this bear is a threat, but I have a walkie-talkie. I can call somebody to help me get out of this stressful situation. And so in that instance, maybe you're not experiencing that stress response. What happens a lot of times in organizations is when we experience major organizational change, it is both outside of our control and we feel like we don't have the tools to cope with it.
Yeah. Quick tidbit. If you're gonna hike and camp in the woods, use a bear bag so that they don't come try to eat all your food and wake you up in the middle of the night. But yeah, I think when we're talking about organizational change, specifically in nonprofits, we, in my experience, are so regimented and like stuck in what we're doing and the processes that we're doing them with that it just feels like such a big deal to make a change.
Yes, of course, especially when you are strapped for time, when things
Yeah.
are urgent, when there are people that you need to provide services to, when there's not enough staff to help take care of the workload. There are all of these pressure points that can happen in organizations, but especially for nonprofits that make when big changes need to happen, it makes that change process like even more stressful because you don't feel like you have the resources to be able to cope with that change. So when we think about what makes employees like healthy and well, there's a lot of things that go into that. Security, certainly, having money, being able to take care of yourself and your family, being able to use your skills, being able to set goals and have meaningful goals. But also that autonomy and control are essential components of health and well-being inside the workplace and outside the workplace. So in times of incredible like change, you may feel like you don't have the autonomy or the control over this situation. You can't control the fact that like people are still showing up at your doorstep asking for services. You can't control the fact that you are short-staffed and that everybody has already put in 60 hours this week. And so now there's this new thing that is coming that now we have to tackle this additional change. It can just be incredibly stressful for the people who are in that situation.
Yeah, most definitely very overwhelming. And just trying to figure out how to fit that into your brain space when you're trying to balance and navigate everything else just sometimes feels kind of impossible.
Especially, I think, when changes are happening. I'm thinking now kind of at the staff level. So I want to go
Hmm.
to like down to, the employee level. Leaders may know that change is coming. They may be planning for the change, but the staff people may not know why this change is happening. Why do we have to, do it differently when we've always done it this way? They haven't had the opportunity to be able to plan. That ambiguity and that lack of information and the lack of predictability. I don't know what my job is going to be like now. I don't know what is going to be on the other side of this change. That can be incredibly stressful to the people who are experiencing that.
Yeah, I think that that reminds me of a conversation that we had in a recent episode where we talked about communication and how important it is in developing trust amongst your employees, and how when something comes out of left field and you didn't even know that it was a possibility, it feels disorienting as a staff person. Like, okay, we're making this change. Where did this even come from? Why are we doing this? And when we don't get those answers, it's kind of hard to buy in on the fact that we're making these changes because we weren't involved in the process to begin with.
Yeah, that trust, organizational trust between the leaders of the organization and the people doing the work. If that trust is not there, it's really going to hinder your ability to be able to have successful change. Now, change, as I said, is kind of inevitable, though. Like, we're not eating the same thing for dinner every night. Things are going to come up in an organization that are going to require changes. So, for example, when I was in graduate school, I worked for the Center for Healthcare Technology at the university that I was at. And we were investigating the extent to which this newfangled thing called an electronic medical record was going to influence care at the bedside. Like, what do you mean we don't have a paper chart anymore? That was pretty substantial, major change that was happening in healthcare. And there were big, important questions that were being asked about how is this going to change the workflow of the nurses, the people who are providing that minute by minute, everyday care at the bedside? And will these changes coming from this newfangled technology affect my ability to be able to do what I'm here to do, which is to take care of people? That's why I joined nursing. I didn't join nursing to be on a computer all day. I joined nursing to be at the bedside caring for my patients. So yeah, there's definitely times when, well, like change is coming. You're not using a paper chart forever. Although I don't watch The Pit, but I have heard that there it was a episode of The Pit, the show on HBO,
Mm-hmm.
where the computers went down and they had to go back to paper charts. And it really took me back to having those focus groups and doing site visits and following nurses around in all kinds of floors, med surge floors, a CV step down. Like I was in all kinds of hospitals during that time, watching to see how this newfangled technology was going to affect the nurses doing the care at the bedside. By the way, follow up to that. Do you want to know what percentage of time nurses were spending charting, percent of their day that they were spending charting in the paper chart?
I would
What would
love
you
to
guess?
know that. Oh
Guess what
no.
percentage? Yeah, I'm
A
going to make you guess.
percentage. Oh no, okay, but also I'm the worst guesser ever. So I'm gonna say something like totally outlandish, and you're gonna be like, no, Sarah, it's like I don't know, like 60%.
Okay, you're like, man, they must have to spend a lot of time
A
charting, right?
lot
That
of
must be
time.
it. When we actually, the organization that we worked with did a study where they, instead of just asking the nurses, how much time do you think you're charting? They followed them around with their little paper charts. And well, they were big charts, I guess, at that point. And they found that the nurses were spending 20% of their time in the paper chart. Then, after the establishment of the electronic medical record, they followed the nurses around. And guess what percentage of time nurses were spending charting?
Is it more? I feel like it's got to be more, right?
When they asked the nurses, how much time are you now in the computer? The nurses were saying 50%, 60%, right? Like they
Yeah.
were saying, I'm spending so much time in this computer.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when the researchers actually went in and followed these nurses, they were spending 20% of their time in the electronic medical record. So it was the same.
Hilarious.
It was the same. But perception is everything. And again, I think these nurses were resistant to that change because it was going against what they perceived to be their values. My
Yeah.
value here is patient care. You want me on a computer. But so the perception was their reality. That's what they thought that they were experiencing. And again, this was over 20 years ago. So it was different. There wasn't a computer in every room. They were having to do a lot of walking around, finding open computers. Like it was a different time. But the reality of the situation was that their jobs hadn't changed really all that much. And yet, because of this massive change in technology, they perceive their job as really changing a lot more than it had.
I wonder what the like the efficiency of record keeping was, paper versus like computers, and also like what their notes may have looked like. Like I wonder if they were able to give a more broad overview of what a patient was going through in the electronic copy versus maybe
Yes.
rushing around and doing the patient copy.
Sarah, this is such a great question, and it actually drives home a really important point when it comes to how you can have effective change in an organization. The variability in how these nurses were charting with the paper chart was great. There was a lot of variability. Some of the nurses that we followed around, they called it their paper brain, and they would have a piece of paper that they would go and they would do vitals for all of their patients in, that were under their care at the beginning of their shift. They would write down like whatever the vitals were. They would put it on a piece of paper, and then they'd put that paper brain, as they called it, and they would stick it in their pocket. And then they would go and get maybe their cup of coffee or whatever. And then they would sit down at the central nurses station and they would chart. They would batch their charting. What the organization was finding was that the further in time and distance between the patient and the entry, the more errors that were occurring. Now, if you look at a nurse and you say, you're hurting your patients, you're doing errors using your paper brain, they're going to, again, that is not their values. They're going to look at you and say, nobody, I got in this to take care of people, not to hurt people. You're wrong. I have a system. Leave me alone. Let me do my job. But so both the organization, the leaders of the organization and the nurses cared deeply about patient safety, but the nurses were resistant to this change because they were like, the computer is going to make me lose that connection in the room with my patient. But there were other nurses, I wish I was joking, where we would follow them and they didn't have a piece of paper in their pocket. So they would just walk into the patient's room and they would grab a paper towel from the paper towel dispenser and they would write the vitals on the paper towel. And then you're like, oh my gosh, what if you get that wet? Like, what are you going to do? You get back to the nurse's station and you're like, I don't know. Was that a 4? Is that a 9? I don't really know. And so, being able to convince over time to convince these nurses that like this is a change that is actually aligns with your values. You value patient safety and this is going to make patients more safe. Now, it took some time for the technology to get to a place we couldn't have even dreamt of, like the way that it is now, which is that there's a computer in every room. Back then, you couldn't afford a computer in every room. That wasn't the reality of the infrastructure. The computers were too expensive to do that. So it took some time for the technology to really catch up to where the nurses could do it in a way that they were like, oh, okay, yes, this is really aligning with the values that I have and the work that I'm doing.
I wonder if it increased like patient outcomes too, because less mistakes were being made from the paper chart to the computer chart.
Yeah, and I'm sure somebody probably in the nursing field has done this research, so I'm not entirely sure, but my guess would be that hopefully that it has reduced some of those errors. When we think about how to change, so like change is inevitable, change is part of life, change is part of organizations, new technology will come in. When we think about how do we change, lucky for us that there are a couple of researchers out there that have looked at like what this process is like. So first we start with like Kurt Lewin. His early theory of change was like there's basically these 3 parts. And then we have John Cotter, another researcher who comes a little bit after him that says, I'm going to take your 3 and I'm going to like spell them out a little bit more clearly into what he calls now like the 8 steps of change. So essentially what Kurt Lewin said is like, you got a frozen situation, like your structure of your organization is what it is. You've got to unfreeze, change some things around, refreeze. So that's kind of like the 3 steps. You've got to take the way that things are being done now and you've got to undo it. You've got to create structures, create situations where it's like, we're not going to do it this way anymore. We're going to do it differently. Try it out this way. And then once the people in the organization are doing it this new, different way, you've got to now solidify that as the way to do it. So when John Cotter comes along, he's like, yeah, I'm going to take those 3 phases, but I'm going to like add to them. And he talked about how in order to change in an organization, the first thing that you have to do is establish a sense of urgency. And I think by that, really what he's saying is like, you have to convince people that this change is necessary. It is needed. We need to increase patient care. We need to reduce these medical errors. We know medical errors are harming people and we've got to do something about it. So that sense of urgency is important. And you've
having that tie back to your mission, like, I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, that's how you get people to buy in.
Exactly. Here's what we're here for. This is why we're doing the work that we're doing. And if our processes are no longer meeting that mission, then hey, this is urgent. We've got to fix this. We've got to address this. There's nothing like a pandemic, by the way, to establish a sense of urgency. Remember when we all had to change so much of our lives in a like moment's notice?
Yeah, boy, howdy, do I remember that. Yes, it was probably the largest organizational change that our organization has and will ever go through.
And I think just about every organization can say the same thing, is that probably the pandemic was some of the biggest changes that ever had to been made. When I think about the fact that like 15 years ago, when I just had a little old baby in the car, if I could have just like used my phone and clicked a button and then and Kroger would have just delivered groceries to my house, or I could have pulled up to Target and somebody would have brought things out to me with my sleeping baby in the car. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, that would have been a great change. But those were not things necessarily that I don't know, maybe those organizations were planning to do those things for a long time, but it took the pandemic for it to really be like, oh, wait, if we can't bring people into our store, how do we continue to sell goods? Let's Can we do it in the parking lot? What does that look like if we're doing it in the parking lot? And now it's just become a mainstay that you are able to get that stuff from a store now very easily when you couldn't before.
Yeah, I think that you were right in saying like nothing creates urgency like that created urgency. It was just like one day you're in the office and the next day it's not safe for you to be in the office. And so when we were going through that, it was like hours and hours of even figuring out, okay, this is what our in-person policies look like. How do we even do this virtually? And of course, I mean, we figured it out, and our organization is better for having figured that out. We're better able to serve the people that we serve. We're better able to provide for our employees. But in the moment, it was a whole lot.
It was a whole lot. It was a whole lot. I think too for nonprofits, if it's not a pandemic that's the cause of the change, a lot of nonprofits, they already have a sense of urgency in the work that they're doing. So trying to also now like change the computer system or something is like so low on the priority list.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's why nonprofits especially it can be hard to change in that industry because you already have something that is the most important thing that you need to be focusing on every day, and that's providing services to the people that you're providing services to.
Yes, can confirm. That is exactly what is going through my head every time we have to make any sort of major change.
So, Cotter, it also talks about like what's incredibly important is to establish a sense of urgency, then form a coalition. You got to bring a group of people together and say, this is what we need to change. This is how we need to change it. You've got to have an idea of what this new vision is going to be. As an organization, we are now going to fill in the blank. Like you
Mm.
have to be able to have that vision and to be able to articulate and communicate that vision is incredibly important. So that's all part of like the unfreezing part is a sense
Right.
of urgency, creating a coalition, forming a new vision, and communicating that vision clearly to the people who are now going to have to make the change.
Yeah, I think that forming a coalition piece is so important because you need to have strong leadership buy-in or, strong leader buy-in when you're getting ready to make a change like that. I also think that when we talk about creating and communicating a vision, like again, being open, transparent with your people when you're communicating why the change is being made, not just what the change is.
Exactly. Because again, remember, I'm camping. The change is a bear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I need to know number one, is this change, this bear in front of me, is it threatening to me? Is it uncontrollable? Or I'm okay, right? I've got a walkie talkie here. I know I can get through this change. I can cope with the situation that's in front of me, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, so then the movement has to happen. Now we're in, step two. We are now unfreezing, so we have to make the actual change be implemented. So we are empowering other people by guess what? Removing barriers is
Mm.
one of the critical components of that. If you want your staff to change, and they say, I can't change because XYZ, you need to do everything in your power to take X, Y, and Z away from the equation. For example, when the nurses were trying to do these electronic medical records, They said, fine, you got to use the electronic medical records. And they said, great, you only have one nurse's station and it's all the way down the hall and it's far away from me and it's far from my patients. So that's not going to work. So that's a barrier to me using this new system is the location of where the computers are. You only have two computers. There's lots of nurses on this floor. How are we all going to be charting at the same time? So this particular organization, I still get tickled by this acronym that they use. They came up with COWS, COWS, which were
Excellent.
computers on wheels,
Yes.
which was basically a laptop that was like on top of a pedestal that had wheelies on the bottom so that it could be
Excellent.
wheeled around. Again, this was before there were computers in every room. And then people would not plug up the laptops. They didn't have very good battery life. They would be like dead. And so they had to like fix that. And then the nurses were like, but I can't get connected to the internet because the Wi-Fi is so bad here. And then they had to put up like repeaters and routers, all of that stuff. So as an organization, you want them to change. You've got to put in the infrastructure to allow them to do it and remove the barriers that are there.
Gosh, that is such a good point, and one that I think not necessarily gets missed, but doesn't get the attention it kind of deserves. It's like we push through change, but we're not necessarily thinking about the hiccups that are involved with that change and how we can manage those hiccups to make the change process feel smoother for people.
Yeah, I think sometimes leaders just might get into the standpoint of like, oh, stop complaining. You're just
Yeah.
complaining. You just don't want to change. That's why you're like telling me all this stuff. And that might be true. People may not want to change, but they also could be articulating to you like, no, these are barriers to me being able to do it differently. So you got to listen to your people.
Yeah, and you got to listen in a way that that takes some of the defensiveness out of it. Like people aren't saying those things to you because they think you're a bad leader because you're trying to force through this change. It's like they're saying these things to you so that the change can be successful. So I think that, taking some of that just personally out of your feelings about it might be helpful.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so next, after you remove barriers, I think this is probably another one that a lot of organizations don't do, which is you got to reward the short-term wins.
Yes.
The fact that you tried to take the cow down the hallway into the room and it didn't work, yeah, but you still tried. You were trying to chart closer to the bedside. If you see your staff trying the change out and they are, even if they don't hit the mark, but they're putting forth the effort and they're working towards that goal, what are the reinforcers that you're putting in place? Where's the reward structure? How do people know that they're doing a good job? Otherwise, why am I doing this change? It was easier for me to do it the old way. So if there's no reward for doing it the new way, why am I doing it?
This is a thing that, in my experience, nonprofits are not the best at. I, again, I can only speak from my own perspective. There are always kind words, way to goes, things like that. But we don't stop to like celebrate small wins and small changes because we're always on to the next. Right. So, one of the things that one of my mentors, Dr. Sheila Schuster, always says is you have to celebrate the small wins. You have to take those small victories and use them as fuel to continue to motivate you to fulfill your mission. So when we think about it from an organizational change perspective, if people are putting in the effort, going through the stress of making a change that affects the way that they work, not acknowledging that in some form or fashion in a way that resonates with those people is not going to make your change successful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do want to be cognizant of the fact that nonprofits, as we've talked about, have limited resources. Maybe I'm not out here handing out $100 bills to every employee every time they do something the right way. And those thank yous and congratulations are a kind of reward and reinforcer, but sometimes it's got to be maybe a little bit more celebratory, especially if it's a big change. Like just saying, hey, thanks for doing that may not be enough of a reward if I'm majorly changing the way that I'm doing my job.
And I think that it's important to ask your people what they want. I was having a conversation with my seventh grader recently, and they had gotten some good test scores at school or something like that. And the principal was like, okay, for the whole week, you guys get to wear pajamas and hats every day. And my seventh grader was like, nobody wants that. Like, nobody is excited about wearing PJs to school. I could wear track pants to school and it's fine. Nobody's wearing hats to school. Like, it just doesn't feel like it's actually a reward for us. It's just like a thing they thought we wanted. And that was one of those instances where it illuminated for me, like, had they asked ask your student council to ask kids in the classroom what would be exciting for you, what could we do, if you give people things that they've expressed that they want, they're going to resonate more with it. It's going to feel more like a reward. So I think giving your people some parameters or some, mechanism to make suggestions on things that they would resonate with as a reward is something that leaders can easily do and would make the that reward process feel better for the folks who we want to show appreciation to.
Yeah, it is. It's very frustrating for me too, because B.F. Skinner talked about this stuff 100 years ago. Like, this is like really basic psychology of learning, behaviorism topics that you learn. I teach about this in my intro to psych class. Like, in order for it to be a reinforcer, it has to be a consequence. We call it an appetitive stimulus, which is the very like fancy official term. But in order for it to be a reinforcer, increase the desired behavior, it's got to be something you want. So if it's not something you want, it's not going to work. You have to ask your people, what is it that you would like? What is something that would actually be some appetitive stimulus? Don't ask your people what's an appetitive stimulus. They probably won't know what that is, but you can say like, hey, what do you want?
I'm going to imagine you wearing a monocle saying appetitive stimulus. Um, yeah, I
Don't
just
give
think
them aversive stimulus. That's the opposite, is an aversive stimulus. So if you
uh,
give them something they don't want, that's what we refer to as an aversive stimulus.
so like a pizza party.
Well, unless you really like pizza, and then in
I,
which case it might work.
I mean, maybe. I am a fan of pizza. Please don't take this as anti-pizza propaganda. I love pizza. But I I think that that is like a critical point, and I think that's something easy that leaders can do. Like, if you've got a larger organization, you can take your leadership team from that organization, say, hey, we want to implement this new rewards policy. Go back to your departments, talk to your people, bring me back some ideas. In our organization, there's 3 to 4 of us at a time who are employed here. At staff meeting, I might say, hey guys, like, what do y'all want? What would be exciting for you? What are things that we could be doing to show our appreciation? Because we're going to show our appreciation to you regardless, but we want you to get what you want.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, like, nonprofits don't typically have like resources. Like, I can't give everybody like a weekend's vacation stay at somewhere fabulous, but I could throw you a like, hey, like, we're all going to take the day off this day, or hey, we're going to go out, and grab a bite to eat for lunch this day or something. Like, we can do things.
Yes. And to make sure that the people realize that that reward is directly tied to this behavior.
Yes.
Thank you for trying. It was a short-term win. I know change is hard. I want to thank you for this small change that you've made. We're going to keep working, but here's something to help motivate you to like keep going with this change, which really is kind of like that seventh step, that last step in this movement phase is consolidate, reassess, adjust. So you want to be paying attention as a leader to what is working, what's not working, what slight change can we make? Oh, the Wi-Fi is not good. Can we put in another router? Like, what are the barriers that are in place? Can I remove those barriers? Can I reassess and just keep supporting?
Yeah, I think that like feedback analysis at that point in the change process is also like critically important and something that we don't necessarily like, and again, in my experience, spend a lot of time on. There is so much to be learned from going through a process like this. I mean, reflecting back on the pandemic, we learned so much about how our organization can operate. If you don't give yourself that time to look back at the change that you're making and seeing what worked well, what are the challenges that we face doing this, what are some things that next time we want to do differently? Like, I feel like that's a critical step, that because nonprofit organizations are always so mission focused, always on to the next thing to serve the populations that they're serving, that they don't always spend a lot of time looking back at what you did right and what you can change for next time.
Yeah. It is cyclical in that way. It's never ending. And you always want to make sure that you are reinforcing. That's really the last step, is like reinforcing the changes. And that's reinforcing the changes in, we've been talking a lot about like rewarding people when they do good things. It is also about punishing in the truest sense from like a behaviorist perspective, reducing the undesired behavior. So if we're making a big change, and we're not going to do it this way anymore, once this has been established, if somebody starts doing it the old way, we can't let them do that. There has to be like repercussions for that. You've got to create different norms. You have to like reinforce them doing the right thing and making sure that they're not going back to the way that things used to be.
Yes.
And then you just kind of start the cycle all over again.
Yes. As the governor of Kentucky has said, you can't be doing that.
You
You
can't
can't be
be doing
doing that.
that. That's
You
right.
can't be doing that. When we make the change, we
That's
make the
right.
change together. We're moving forward in this direction. I'm sorry that you preferred the old way, but we can't be doing that.
Yeah. There's your tip, is just tell your people, Andy said you can't be
You
doing
can't be
that.
doing that.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about, and then I want us to talk about some of our personal stories around organizational change. But before we do that, I just want to briefly also introduce something from the literature, which is why people resist change and how to overcome that resistance. And I think that you will not be surprised by any of these. But I don't, even though they're not surprising, they are not necessarily always considered when you are making major change in the organization. So then the number one thing is establishing buy-in. You got to go back to the mission. You have to tell your employees, like, this is the reason why we're making this change. And they have to believe that. They've got to see that this is something that is necessary. So that is a step that I think sometimes leaders try to skip right over. But if you're not establishing buy-in from the beginning, it's going to be harder to get people to change.
Do you think
Educating the workforce about like what is the reason, and we got to do it.
when we talk about buy-in and we're talking about like mid to small nonprofits like KPF, does it make sense at that point? Because I get why like larger organizations would have like leaders making decisions on change, implementing those changes, and having to get buy-in from their workforce. But in a smaller nonprofit, does it make sense for leaders to talk with their staff about the changes being made before just like mandating a change? I
Well,
know.
I would say that like that should actually happen with it to some extent with all organizations should be doing change in that way. I mean, yes, somebody at the top may be a leader that's like, we got to do it differently, but identifying how we do it differently should involve the not just the voice of the employees, but actively involving employees in that decision making process is going to get you better buy-in.
Mhm. That makes sense to me. I asked that question because that's kind of when I'm thinking about making major changes with my staff, I'm usually talking through my thought process with my staff while but again, we're a small staff. We have strong interpersonal connections. Like we can have those conversations. So I just didn't know if there was much of a difference there between a small organization and maybe a larger organization that has like departments and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
But if you are a larger organization that has like some kind of participatory decision making, or you might have committees, you might have
Mm-hmm.
representatives from all of the different areas that come together and they have a meeting. Like there can be places and strategies and programs and policies where you're getting information from your employees already that you can utilize those relationships to establish this buy-in. You kind of one of the things the literature talks about is like you look for the change agents. So you
Mm,
want to find the people in your organization who are like, ooh, this actually is going to be good for us, guys. I have done this change and it actually worked out better. This was better for my workflow. You want to find those people and you want those people to be part of that process of making the change happen, which I think is also part of that establishing the buy-in. That is something that you can do if you're a larger organization where you're not having every staff person talk to the leader one-on-one and make sure every individual person buys in. You have to do it a little bit more decentralized than that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So you were then talking about like educating the workforce.
Yeah, you got to be able to tell people like, "Hey, I know bears are scary, but here's what we're going to do. Everybody's going to have walkie-talkies. Everybody's going to have like the bears are going to be on the other side of a fence. Like you really have to
Yeah,
alleviate some of the fears."
we're gonna hang a bear bag. You can have a bear
That's
whistle.
right.
I know
Right.
so many bear things. Like I'm telling you, when we go out in the woods, I'm like, what predators do I need to be aware of?
Right.
So I hear that. We'll get
Yeah,
you some bear spray.
the more you know, the better you're able to tell that liar that is your anxiety in your brain that like, yes, bears are dangerous anxiety, but I'm okay. Like I'm safe here. Like, thank you for keeping me safe, but like, I'm fine. The bears, like when you go to the zoo, you're not scared of those bears, right? Like, cause your brain is like, well, they're on the other side of this big plate of glass. They can't get to me. Like I'm not scared at all. So whatever it is, it's about educating the employees to alleviate whatever those fears are that they have, meaningfully involve the employees in the decision making and of the change, which we were just talking about. Providing feedback and rewards at regular intervals as part of the change.
Very
And
important.
yes, very important as we
Do not
discussed.
skip.
Do not skip. Do not skip. Do not skip. And then regroup and debrief after successful change. So that's from Nadler, 1981, a different researcher. Lots of similarities there between the other theories, if you will, of organizational change that we talked about. A lot of overlap. But I think when you are a leader who is about to implement change, it's probably important that you make sure that you're hitting on all of these things that could potentially be a barrier if you want the change to be successful. If you don't want the change to be successful or you want it to be long and drawn out and miserable for everybody, I guess you don't have to do any of these things. But if you want it to be a successful change where your clients that you're servicing are not being, given like worse products or worse services, like this is the way that the research says that you should do it.
Yeah. And I think that like what I hope people get out of our conversation is that it's actually not difficult to implement these things to have successful change. Having conversations with your people, educating your folks on why the change is being made, getting their input, planning out how you're going to make the change. I mean, rewarding people for making the change, looking back at the change and learning things from the change. Like these aren't inherently difficult things, but because we are so resistant to change.
Sarah's pointing to herself.
Yes, for those of you who are not watching me on YouTube, I am pointing at me. For those of us who don't like change and who are resistant to change, it's easy to make excuses on why not to do the change because your little anxiety guy is running your brain, your
Yeah. I mean,
inside out brain console.
you might be perfectly happy having a different thing to eat for dinner every night if you get a say in what you're eating.
Yeah. But you know what? You might also enjoy it if you don't have to make it.
Yes,
I
yeah.
mean, I know that doesn't relate at all to what we're talking about, but I would
Well,
be
no,
down for that.
it can relate in that like I don't necessarily want to develop the new software. Like I don't want to tell you how to fix it. I'm telling you there's a problem in my workplace and I'll do it differently if the different way is going to be better. But can you go figure out like what's the better way? I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of how you can relate it. Okay, Sarah, I'm interested in like, do you have an example that you can give of like a time when you've experienced some organizational change?
Well, as I've already mentioned, COVID was crazy. Everybody can relate to that. But the when I was thinking about this conversation today, recently ish, like in the last year and a half or so, we in our organization had just we've kind of like had it with our website platform, and we're like, we it's not giving us what we need. The customer service is not where we need it to be. We got to make a change. We got to do something because it's affecting our efficiency in the office. So we do a bunch of research. We find a website developer who has worked with other organizations that are similar to ours. And we're like, okay, we're going to do this. Um, so we go through all of the things that you do when you're planning to make a website transition. We pulled all of our information down from our current website. We're manipulating data. We're like trying to make sure that it's all going to be ready. And we put like hours and hours and hours and hours into prepping for this transition. Um, but it didn't actually turn out like it wasn't actually like a win for us. So we were going through this process. We kept hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock with this website developer who, frankly, had oversold what their capabilities were. And we're not going to be able to produce the product that we had contracted them to produce. So we had to make a decision like, do we stick with this or do we pull away? Like, we've committed to making this change. We understand it feels urgent to make this change. We have buy-in from our staff to make this change, but it's not working. And like, I don't know, Court, like that's not a good feeling. Like when you're resistant to change and then you go to do the change and it doesn't work out. But we had conversations with our board of directors. We explained the situation. Everybody was very kind and understanding. And so we pulled ourselves out of that relationship with that website developer. And when we talk about like the cycle of organizational change with the work that Cotter did, um, like there were like how do you find positive feedback in a situation like that? How do you reward small victories when you feel like it failed? And I think that for me, like we gained like we are resilient people now. Like we can get through some stuff because you know what? We made it through that situation on the other side and we're okay. Um, but it's hard to find rewards for something when you feel like you failed.
Yeah.
And what I think that that situation gave us, even though like this is probably a terrible example because I'm like, we did a bad job at organizational change. But I think that what people can learn from that is like, it's okay to fail when you try to make a change because you can learn from those failures and implement those when you actually like are able to make that change successful. Like we're still
Yeah.
on that journey. We're still in that cycle. We're looking at other platforms that we're looking to move to soon. So the lessons that we learned from that, that first attempt at trying to transition our website, um, looking at that now, like informs how we're moving forward. I don't know. Does that
Yeah, but I think I want to flip that on its head a little bit because
let's hear it.
I think that you guys haven't failed,
Oh, tell
actually.
me more.
Okay.
I'd like to hear that I didn't screw this thing up.
Let me tell you how you did not screw this up. Um,
Thank you.
your employees, the staff, recognized a sense of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
You did a bunch of work that was necessary to make this change happen. What failed was sounds like to me was the developer, the website developer.
Yeah.
It was the tool that you all decided to use failed, but that doesn't mean that the process failed. I guess it's still TBD. Like you might still fail. I don't want to say you're not, but
It's possible.
the test will come when you have another developer who knows what they're doing and who is able to actually actually update the website and to actually go through the process of the change. As you said, you guys can look back on this experience and say, wow, we actually have built a lot of resiliency. Because I didn't hear anything in your story of like, oh, I went to the staff and they were like, we don't want to do this. I'm not going to do this work. I don't want to
Oh,
do this process differently. So maybe if you want to add in those details, you could.
there was, I think, well, I think in the beginning there was some resistance and concern, like, oh, this is going to be a lot of work. And we're like, it will be a lot of work, but on the other side of it, it's going to be good. I think what really was one of the driving forces to removing ourselves from that relationship with that developer was because our staff came to us and they were like, this is not working. Like, we're doing all this work, we're sending it to the developer. They are not providing the services that they said they provide. So there was definitely some staff pushback from that. Like, I don't want to rose colored glasses any of this. There was definitely some staff pushback. But I think that, again, on reflection, as leaders of the organization, we did the right thing in listening to that staff pushback. It wasn't just, we liked the old system, we want to stay with the old system, so we're going to be like harshly against the new system. It was, we tried this change. There are too many roadblocks for us to overcome. They're outside of your control to remove those barriers. What are we doing about this? So I don't want to leave any disillusionment that we did not get pushback from our staff, because we most certainly did, which as a leader
Yeah.
made it a little more stressful to manage.
And you listened to that and you
Yeah.
acted on it. This all sounds like a great, this sounds successful to me. The ultimate success will be when the other developers identified, we actually do see the transition change of the website. And one of the things, of course, as a leader that you likely are concerned about and should be concerned about is, because this didn't happen well the first time, how will the staff be more resistant to this change with the second go round? Hopefully, the fact that they felt that there was enough psychological safety that they could come to the leaders and say, this isn't working, let's please do this differently, and that you all listened to them and acted on it. That means that when the next change is coming, you're going to be successful. So overall, there, we talked about what you can control and what you can't control. Like, you can't control bears in the woods. Like, sometimes, like, that's, you're in their territory, buddy,
You sure
right? Like,
can't. Yeah.
sometimes the bears are going to come. It sounded like you guys actually handled that really well. And the short-term wins, you were able to get the staff on board, you were able to make a lot of work happen that was necessary for the change. It's just a like, you're still, I think, in the movement phase. Like, you guys are still in the unfreezing movement, which has got to be frustrating because we're talking about like a long time that's going by, and you'd really like for this like change to be finished and finalized and be able to say, yay, we did it. So I know it's frustrating to be in that phase, but to me, it doesn't feel like you've failed at change. It just feels like you're still in the middle of the change.
Thank you for that. I feel like I needed somebody to tell me that. Attention, listeners, you might just be in the middle of your change.
Yeah,
It's okay.
it's okay. Yeah, you might still be successful. Things could be happening. You're just in the middle of it, and it being in the middle of it does not always feel great, but it's the journey, not the destination, right? Like, unfortunately, I don't think you ever, hopefully, ever in an organization get to a point where you're like, we're doing everything perfectly. No need for any more change, no need to do it any better. Like, you always want to be striving, I think, as humans to do better, to meet more goals, to, serve more people, to, like, you're going to constantly be striving to do more things. But yes, will you feel good once that like website changeover happens? Check. Yes.
Absolutely.
You will absolutely feel better.
I will big celebrate that win. So that's my apparently successful change story. Thank you for the reframe.
Yeah.
You want to share one of yours?
Yeah. Let me think about which one I'd like to tell you about. So I'm going to do one that's not a nonprofit change, and one that I think that ended up being unsuccessful. So maybe you'll help to see if I'm right in that, or maybe you'll flip this for me too. Let's see.
Excellent.
So I was working at a restaurant that was right next to the venue, essentially, where like all of the operas and the Broadway shows played. Okay. It was a brewery, but high-end food. But then we would also, on occasion, have people that would come in like their faux fur coats and their like tuxedos, right? Because sometimes they were going to the opera or they were dressing up to
Right.
go out for their one night of the year to this big Broadway show. And we had some difficulty, I would say, like, especially on those nights. We would have very long ticket times. People were in a hurry, and the food would not always come out very quickly. Now, little did I know at the time that I was a little IO psychologist all along, and I was identifying all kinds of things wrong with this workplace. I was identifying issues with like hiring and training, and like, okay, I didn't know that yet. This is before I even went to graduate school. So, what I did know was that the people who, from my little mind, this was just from my perspective, okay? But the people who were being hired to work in the kitchen weren't properly trained by us on how to do this food. Like these would just be people that would like come in with like a resume in the front door and they would be like, yeah, I was a fry cook at the place down the street, and we would hire them. And I liked these guys that worked on the line in the kitchen. I had great relationships with them and I felt bad for them. Like they would be thrown with like so many tickets all at once. And we were just failing. Like the restaurant was failing. We were having to comp so many people's food. People were just getting up and leaving because they had to be at the show. They didn't have time
Right.
to sit and wait. And we were not doing a good job of like figuring out how to make this work. So we got bought by another company, another restaurant, like bought our restaurant. And the people who bought us from California, which no dig to
Fancy.
California, but like, look, these people from California don't know what's happening at our restaurant. I don't know if they ever came down and talked to anybody at my workplace. But that's what we thought about them, was like these people from California. They swoop in and they closed the restaurant for like 2 days, closed the restaurant. And they come in and they say, we're changing everything. We're changing everything. We're changing the menu. We're going to make the whole menu different, and we're going to make it easier food to cook. So we went from goat cheese ravioli, which was like my favorite thing on the menu, that kind of food, like
Yeah.
high elevated, very good food, to like burgers and fries. And we did have a burger, but like we had like an elevated burger. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
everything, like the whole menu got dumbed down. And I immediately was like raising my hand, like, what are you doing? The problem is not the food. I mean, there could be like, if the problem is the food, yes, let's make a menu just for like the events where it's a limited menu and it has limited dish. Like anybody who's ever worked in a restaurant is probably listening to this going like, duh, well, like we know how to do this. People have figured this out. And maybe we tried a limited menu for a time, but whatever. That's not what they decided to do. They said, instead of doing these foods, we're just going to do these foods. And my point was, you still have the same people working in the kitchen who are not being trained, who are not being paid very much, to be totally honest, and who are just not like 15 burgers versus 15 plates of pasta. Like it doesn't matter. That's not going to solve the problem. But that's what they did. And so they closed the restaurant for 2 days so that they could teach. They had to totally change the menu. They had to teach all the people how to cook all these new foods. And then the people, the next Broadway show come in and they open and they're in their fancy attire and they open up the menu and it's like burgers and pizza. And they're like, wait a minute, I'm here in my fancy my fancy clothes. I would like my fancy dinner. Where's my goat cheese ravioli? I've been coming to this restaurant for years. This is my favorite. Oh, sorry, we changed the menu. So they just started getting up and leaving without even ordering because they were like, this is not even the kind of food that I want. So I think all of us were resistant to the change. We had no control over it.
Mhm.
Corporate had decided we're changing the menu, we're changing the food, but they didn't want to change any of the processes. They didn't want to listen to any of the employees. They didn't want to give any kind of training or development. They really could have invested in the people who were working in that kitchen and elevated them. They did not do that. And not surprising to me, like not much longer after that, that restaurant closed. They didn't make it. And I know that working in restaurants, it is so difficult to run a restaurant. It is so difficult to run a restaurant for profit. And I'm sure these people really tried, but the point was that they didn't have people that they identified. Like to us, there was no sense of urgency. Why are we changing? This makes no sense. The change
Mhm.
didn't make any sense. There was no reward really for making the change. All of our tickets were going down in price, which meant that like all of us were going to start making less money on tips because our average ticket, per table was going down like 20, $30, for every table. We were losing our regular customers that had been coming in for so long. Like we just didn't see that it was working. And there was no involvement of the staff in the decision making. There was no real evaluation of the organization. They didn't reduce barriers. Like they basically didn't do anything the way that you should do it when you're trying to make major changes. And not surprising, that organization didn't last.
Okay, so I here's my small victory for you. That experience helped create the foundation for little IO Courtney to be
It's true.
born, and for that reason, I am grateful. Outside of that, holy yikes! Like I just think that it. We say this all the time. I feel like communication is key. Talking to your people and getting their input on things that you're doing is critical for buy-in. If you want things to be successful, you have to include folks who are actually doing the work in the decision making process. So the fact that this entity, this unknown entity, came from a different state, did not even come to meet with your staff, totally changed the vibes of your restaurant, which had an established vibe of being like this high end place where you go before the theater. Like this is a fancy place, and to turn it into some sort of like almost like chain restaurant, like quick meal feel was not going to work. And had they talked to people like you, people who had been working there for a fair amount of time, people in the community who go there on a regular basis, they would have known that and it might have actually not gone under as a business.
Yeah. Yeah, it does have the story has a happy ending. Number one, as mentioned, the restaurant was closed for 2 days. One of those 2 days was a day game for the baseball team in town.
Mm.
So that was great. We all got to go to, there's nothing better than a day game for baseball, like just in the middle of the day, downtown Memphis, just to go like hang out at the baseball stadium, eat some hot dogs, watch the good old American pastime. So that was an immediate, like, well, this is fine. And then the other when, well, and two, I left this restaurant before they closed. So that was good. I was already established somewhere else when they finally did close the doors. But the other win is that the restaurant that is now there in that place is run by two absolutely wonderful, fabulous people who are taking care of their employees. They have like paid time off. They are investing in their community, like a dare I say, better establishment got into that place and has been open now for a very long time in that place. So somebody else got into that space succeeding, which is positive. And you're right, like little IO psychologist Courtney was born in that bad situation. So, but yeah, it was just a good example, I think, of change not happening effectively.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I feel like we see that I feel like we see that quite a bit, and it would be easy to kind of turn the tables on it and just follow some of these easier steps that you've outlined for us in this episode to ensure that we are doing it successfully.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope that by sharing these stories and us talking a little bit about this research, that people are able to take something away that can help them to think about change in a way that's a little bit more manageable and to approach organizational change in a way that like ultimately leads to success.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Like we do this work because this work on the podcast specifically because we really hope that we're making the information accessible to leaders to implement into their organization. So, I really appreciate you bringing the research to us. I love your story. I'm so glad that I hate I hate for past Courtney to have had gone through that, but I'm glad that present Courtney has that experience to look back on for things not to do.
Yeah. And I am hopeful that future Sarah is going to be able to say, hey, we made this major change and it went really well. So here's to past, present, future us.
I love it. I love it.
Our last segment of every episode is our Ripples of Gratitude. This is where we say who we are especially thankful for this week, with the hope that that inspires you all to go about in your life and be thankful for the people who are around you. So, Sarah, I thought for my Ripple today, since I was just talking about change in a restaurant that didn't go well, I thought that I would give my Ripple of Gratitude out to some restaurant owners that are doing it well. So, as I mentioned, there was another organization that came into that restaurant that is called The Majestic, and The Majestic is run in Memphis, Tennessee by Patrick and Denny Riley. They are two leaders who are doing it differently in the restaurant business. They actually offer things crazy like paid time off to their workers. They pay their people very well. They give them health benefits. They have like mental health match policies. Like, it's just a very inclusive, fantastic environment. They are also restaurateurs who have had to like make significant changes in their restaurant during COVID. They had to do things differently. They've opened up new restaurants as well. So like they're doing the organizational change, but they're also doing it in ways that take care of their employees. So this is kind of a shout out to like anybody who's out there as leader, doing it differently, taking care of their employees, and not saying we're going to do it this way because everybody else is doing it, but doing it differently. So a shout out to Patrick and Denny.
Yeah, big kudos to Patrick and Denny. That's awesome. I love that they came into that space and they made it something successful while also taking care of their people.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Who's your Ripple to?
So we've talked a lot about change today, and I mentioned in my burnout story in episode 1 that we went through a lot of transition, even leading up into the pandemic. So my ripple of gratitude today goes out to Dr. Katie McBride and Dr. Sheila Schuster, who were the interim transition team for our organization after our beloved executive director of 10 years stepped away at the end of 2019. They certainly did not sign up. They signed up to help us transition to find a new executive director. They most certainly did not sign up to do that during a global pandemic. So when I was reflecting on my burnout story and when I was thinking about organizational change for this episode, I was just really reflecting on how much work they did, how much care they took in the employees during that, what was a very tumultuous time. And they did it right. And I sincerely appreciate everything that they did. The boards of directors that we worked with for both of our organizations during that time. But Dr. McBride and Dr. Schuster were really instrumental in ensuring that we moved forward in a successful way. And they helped hire who I think was the best guy for the job, my boss, who helped me navigate through burnout. So my kudos, my ripples go out to them today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, definitely to both of them. I think both of our ripples today really are about saying thank you to leaders who are taking care of their people. Even when times get tough, they're still focused on taking care of the people.
Yeah. And it's instrumental for organizational success.
Yeah.
Well, Courtney, I think we had like just an excellent discussion today. I hope that everyone enjoyed it. This episode.
I did.
Oh, good. Good. I'm thrilled. I also really enjoyed it. And I think that it really helped me to get a reframe on my own story, hearing that it was not, in fact, a failure, like I've been labeling it in my brain. So thanks for that, Court.
Yep.
This episode of The Burnout Room is sponsored by the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. If you'd like to help support our work bringing free mental health resources to Kentucky nonprofits, please consider donating at KentuckyPsychologicalFoundation.org.
A huge thanks to our producer, Sophia Schindler, for all of her absolutely amazing work, and to my dad, Mike Russell, for composing our music.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in and being a part of this community. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And feel free to leave a comment about topics that would be most helpful for you and your organization.
We will see you next time.